error that I see, and I will say most of you have this error right now. That is the idle adjustment. So the idle adjustment actually opens the butterfly on the carb. So that is actual air coming into the engine. That's like your throttle being pressed a little bit. Is usually almost maxed out or maxed out, and the low jet is too rich. So it's turned out too far to compensate for that. The engine will run like that. What's going to happen is you're going to burn plugs every 10 hours, every 20 hours, you're going to have to replace them. If you have the mixture set right, the plugs will last 100 hours. There is a manual or there's a video by Scout that is freaking amazing that teaches you the quick and dirty way to do it, and you get it set really well. However, there are other engines where you can have, I have a Flyin 190. It has the same carb as a factory R, but the low jet setting is completely different from most other engines. And tuning it is not as intuitive as a Moster. And so what I'll share really quick, if it works, I don't know. We're at altitude, I'm not used to this engine. So you'll be able to do this with any engine, any type of carb, by ear. So this is the old school way to do it. So I think this will fire up. And what I've done is I've maxed out, not maxed out, I've turned up the idle, so the engine will idle, even though the low jet is right now is too rich.
You can run your engine without, as long as it's a non-clutch, you can run your engine without a prop. Just don't sit there and rev it to 15,000 RPM. It's a nice thing about the quick release pump too. If you need to do troubleshooting, you can pop the prop off real easy, and then you can work on your engine.
So you can tell
warm your engine up.
So you can tell this engine's running, right? But I know for a fact right now it's a little bit too rich, and the idle is really high, so it's doing its thing.
You hear how erratic it is already?
It's basically holding throttle part open to compensate for tune. You can do that with a badly tuned engine. If it's badly tuned, you can just hold your throttle and you can probably launch. You saw Adam doing that all night. His engine was not tuned correctly, and he was just holding throttle as he's setting up and then launching it. So what I'll do now is I'm going to turn down. This is not warm, so this is going to be kind of floating all over the place. What I'll do is I'll turn down the idle where the spring is not too compressed.
But maybe the tip is still touching the arm, like it's touching the lever arm there?
No, you need to have pressure on the arm.
Arm, you do, okay.
What I'm saying is, oftentimes, I'll have an engine that comes in, and the spring is squished where all the coils are touching each other, and you cannot turn it anymore, or there's like a half a turn left.
Gotcha.
So, the first thing I do when I get an engine that needs to be retuned, manually, is I'll turn down the idle just enough where the engine can kind of barely idle, maybe with my help with the throttle a little bit, so we'll do that.
Grab a leg.
Okay.
10 leg.
Engine RPMs are lower basically. So what this is gonna do is it's gonna not hold throttle for me. It's gonna let the engine idle naturally. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Counterclockwise to open. So I want to get the engine to where it will talk to me. So this is good. So right now it's idling, and I'm gonna add a little bit of throttle. And then I'm gonna let go. Oh, sorry. Video, I'm sorry. And I'm gonna let it talk to me. I'm not gonna touch it. So if you notice, when it got off the throttle, it came back to idle, and you see it slowing down gradually. It's not too bad. I might make it more rich so you can see it better. So you're gonna start seeing signs. It's gonna start slowing down. One of the other telltale signs that an engine is too rich is you're gonna start having smoke come out of the exhaust. Another indicator that your engine's too rich is if you have oil splatter all over your cylinder, in this bushing, and if you have any oil that's coming out of the airbox on top, you're probably too rich on the low jet. Come on, man. Die on me. I'm gonna open up. I'm gonna make it more rich so you can see this. Okay. That's So all I'm doing is I'm letting it idle. I'm not adding throttle. I'm letting it talk to me and show me the signs naturally, right? There we go. Okay. So I'm gonna give it power and I'm gonna let go. Okay, now it's slowing down. Hopefully we'll see some smoke. You see how rough it's idling and shaking?
Well, what's causing that?
So the engine is too rich, which means it's getting too much fuel, and so it is not running. You can see the smoke coming out, and what will happen is we'll keep going and we'll eventually slow down and stop, right? That's a telltale sign that it's too rich. On the opposite side of the spectrum, I'm not going to touch the idle from this point, period. What I'll do is I'm going to lean it out. So I'm going to turn the low jet clockwise and close it too far to show you what it's going to do when it's too lean.
How far are you turning it right now?
Don't worry about it. Yeah. Okay. it doesn't, well, okay. I'm showing you the two extremes so you have a better idea of seeing it. Always start at the factory setting first. So set the low jet to a factory setting, drop your idle so it barely runs, so you can actually feel it and listen to it. It should be lean now. We'll see.
That might be cleaning out from one of the rich though.
Yeah. Yeah. Moster is not that. So a regular Moster with a WB3A1. Is that what it is?
WB3A, yep.
WB3A1. It is much more sensitive. It is like within like the littlest amount that you can move it. Okay. We're gonna go more. So on the lean side, it's gonna have kind of the opposite effects. So
It's not, I know what you're thinking.
So on the lean side, telltale signs are the engine, instead of slowing down, will start speeding up. Another telltale sign is if you add some throttle and you let go of the throttle, it doesn't settle back to idle right away. You can hang and go boo, 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 and then drop down back to idle. So it's kind of sluggish to get back down to idle. With a propeller, as you'll see in the Scout video, another telltale sign of the engine being too lean is if you abruptly add throttle. So if you punch it, it will go boo and die, usually. Or it will struggle to reach into that RPM. So let's see if this is too lean now. Let's give it a shot. Oh, that noise it just made where it went, that's a telltale sign that it's too lean.
You're going to have higher EGTs, obviously, with that too.
On the lower RPMs, yes.
So what you just do there is you lean it out further?
So don't worry. All I'm trying to do is show you how the engine physically behaves when it's too rich or too lean, and the telltale signs of those two extremes. Oh, I went too far. Well,
To wind the springs.
yeah, I went way too far.
So it'll lead to...
So this carb is really forgiving compared to Moster, unfortunately. So it's going to be much harder to show you.
But then you'd have to draw it out exactly before you and then get the exact measurement where you're trying to be fully free. If you don't do the free wind and the free wrap, you're overthinking it. You don't think it's the same thing, and it's not, because the position of where it is.
Did you say that the factory R or the standard Moster is more sensitive to carb?
No, because then you don't know where this
On a standard Moster, between too lean and too rich is the smallest physical step that you can physically make.
And what about the is that and then but the
This has more range. This has more range.
It's not about this, it's about where you're trying to
Okay, so you did 3
Hey,
so
So I cannot get it to do one thing, which is really, really indicative of being too lean, which is what I described, where the engine will idle high, and then you add some throttle, and it doesn't want to return back to idle. It will kind of hang up high. So this doesn't want to do it. But, so let's say at this point we're roughly, Neil, what's the, oh. I think it's half a turn. Does anybody know what the factory setting on a factory R is? Half a turn?
We did 30 to 40 minutes on mine.
40 minutes?
30 to 40 minutes.
Okay.
Neil. Hey, Neil.
We'll do this afterwards.
Factory R setting.
Factory setting is half a turn, right?
Half turn.
So, first thing I'll do is see where I'm at.
I understand why you're doing it.
So again, the signs are, if it's too rich, you're going to have an idle that will slow down. If you're going to see smoke, it will start bucking, getting shaky and stuff like that, and it will die if you don't touch it. If it's too lean, it's going to do the opposite. The idle will be higher. It's going to start potentially speeding up and speeding up. Your prop will start spinning if it's really lean. Or it will also fail to settle back at a normal idle RPM after you give it some gas. So you give it some gas, you let it go, it will kind of hang high and drop down. So that's how you kind of feel how the engine is behaving. And so one other telltale sign that Scout shows, which is amazing in their video, is you use that feedback that the engine makes, that little guh sound when it's too lean, to find the perfect sweet spot on the engine.
Also, bending over to grab your risers and it dives on you, that's telltale sign of lean as well.
Yep. Or if you're doing an acro run, both too rich and too lean can cause your engine to die.
What if you crank it up like cold and it will idle fine and run just good unless you touch your throttle and then it dies?
It's generally lean. The way I do it is I try to make sure the engine's warmed up completely before you do any tuning. If you're trying to tune it when it's cold and then you're also chasing the idle with the idle screw and everything, you're going to be all over the place trying to just chase your tail with it.
Yep. So anything that I set up right now, chances are when the engine's warm, it's going to be off. But it's still indicative of what the engine does. What I want to teach you is the signs to listen for, to visually observe and to remember. Because when you're in the field and you're like, yeah, I've been standing here laying on my wing and my engine is smoking and it's idling kind of rough, it's probably too rich. Or, if I'm doing acro or whatever, like you said, if you bend over and the engine dies, or if your engine is a little bit cold and you're like launching and you give it power and it goes, ugh, and it doesn't want to transition into the upper RPMs in a snappy way, telltale sign that it's too lean.
But what kind of oil are you using?
Oh, let's not go down that road.
He waited this whole time. He told me he was going to do that.
The
Called out.
tables are being thrown.
So let me see if this will make that noise. I want you guys to hear this noise so you remember it. And hopefully it will run off. That. Don't do it.
Pretty good commercial for the factory R,
I'm
ain't
gonna put a
it?
prop on and do it with the prop so we don't burn up this engine. Well, honestly, nothing's gonna happen to the engine if you do that, but just in case.
Dimitri, so when you're talking about like looking at the idle set screw and making sure that there's enough gap in the springs, how do you know that you've gotten it out far enough or not too far to where you're not going to get
So what I'm showing you,
I understand the low versus being too lean
Yeah.
or rich.
yeah.
But what if you have your idle in just a little bit too high and it's running rich? Wouldn't it? It would still, I guess, still vibrate and it would still smoke and it would still decline.
If the idle is too high, it will mask a lot of these symptoms that I'm showing you.
Right. So you want to. Just
So I'm
get
telling
on
you,
the low
start out
range.
to put the idle screw where it's not smashed into a reasonable place where the engine barely runs.
Okay.
Because when it's idling just high enough to stay running, or if you have to give it throttle a little bit of time, you'll be able to let it do what it's doing, and it's going to either drop down, speed up. It's going to show you all those symptoms right away. It's going to talk to you better.
Okay.
After you have your fueling set correctly, that is when you would go and set your idle to the factory spec or vaguely there.
Okay.
Make sure your engine's warmed up first, though. 'Cause if
Yes,
it doesn't, it will lie
absolutely.
to you.
Yep. Don't do what we're doing. I'm just showing you the specific signs that it does and how it talks to you. That's it. That's my whole goal here.
I have a question. What
Yes.
happened with the color of the spark plug? I think you have to see it because too lean
Yeah,
We need some kind
It's
of-
complicated.
That's gonna be wandering off in the weeds too much for this summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only way to correctly read your spark plug is to run your engine at full power in a climb for a period of time to kill your engine, glide down and land, and read your plug. The only thing that will tell you is that the high screw is set to factory settings. or if there's something seriously wrong with your engine. The problem is when your low jet is not set correctly, your plug will get fouled, you will get dirty, a dirty plug and stuff like that. Yes, but you're reading the plug for what it's doing in the high range usually, not in the low range.
It's not a great plug chop's not a great indicator what that. That's what he's trying to show you. Those symptoms, that bogging symptom, or that rough idling in mid-range type of that cruise. What I always say is, go to cruise RPM, look over your shoulders, see if that exhaust is shaking. If it's shaking and wobbling on you, you're too rich.
It's on the bottom. So let's see if we can get it to. Well, first of all, let's do the full start.
Mine yesterday was wobbling.
Yeah. Starting technique that we were talking earlier in relation to the starter. When you got the Plini primer bulbs installed, like most of the paramotors are going to have it, at sea level, what I do is I push the button open, a half bulb worth into the carb, pull past TDC a couple times, and then hit it, and it usually cranks up. It's not quite working as well here at altitude, what I'm finding, but you got the blow tube, so it'll be a little bit different.
So I'm weird, so my technique is not great for learning, but once you get it, it makes sense. I do minimal primes, so we use a blow tube. What I do is I'll blow into the tube, and I'll press the carb button, and I'll watch the fuel go up the fuel line until it goes into the carb. So as soon as it hits the carb, I let go. And then what I'll do is I'll press the button a couple more times, just to let a little bit more fuel in, which is usually not a big enough prime to work. But what I'll do is I'll try to pull start. Oftentimes we'll kick over like that. The problem is if you flood your engine with too big of a prime, you're gonna have a really hard time starting it afterwards. Whereas too little, okay, I'll put it down, if I press the carb on the button one more time, it will usually start. Again, at sea level, that's easier, that's easy. Up here, maybe not. It's different.
Yeah, I have to fly up here more, get used to a little bit of a different technique, but at sea level, it's like money.
What is your starting technique?
Squeeze a half bulb, Plini primer, squeeze a half bulb in it while you're holding the button, pull past top dead center, like 2-3 times, and then hit it.
Yeah. Yeah, so one important thing to do.
I crack the throttle open on mine as well.
You do? Okay, I do not. I do not. I wholeheartedly believe that any engine in paramotors, when it's tuned correctly, it should start without touching the throttle. Some exceptions are some engines when they get hot, they need a little bit of throttle to start. You can still get them to start after a couple of pulls. The bottom line is when your carb has ideal fueling and the idle RPM is set correctly, it should start without you touching the throttle. One important thing is the dry pulls. What we do is this. You'll see me do that every time I go out in the field. When you prime the engine, all that fuel is sitting on top of the reeds. So it's not actually inside the crankcase. The way two-strokes work is when the piston goes down, it pushes the air that's inside the crankcase into the cylinder through the transfer ports. So what I'm doing when I pull this effectively is I'm making the piston go up and down, so it's like a pump. It will pull that mixture from the carb and the reeds into the crankcase, so it's primed inside the crankcase. That way the next time I pull, the mixture will go into the cylinder, the spark will fire, and it will start. So the way I do it is I'll pull the engine over, and then I'll feel the high spot after I've pulled it over one time. Like right now it's binding right here. And I pull it through, I'm not jerking the cable. This poor canopy. I don't want to know what's happening to my tent. So anyway, I've pulled this through to rotate the engine over top dead center, and right now I have a hard spot, so the pawls are engaged, and I feel resistance from the pull starter. This is a recoil starter. The way it works is when I pull, it doesn't directly pull on the crankshaft, so I'm not rotating the crankshaft. There's a spring as I pull that winds up, so it spins first, and then it reaches a point where it turns the engine over, and then all that energy is pushed back into the crankshaft, so it helps me pull start. So we're not jerking, we're not abruptly yanking on the rope, we're not pulling it all the way through to the bottom as far as we can. You don't need to do any of that. This is a flash starter. It's here to help you. So right now I have it on the high spot. All I got to do is pull it through. Pull it through just enough for it. You'll feel it engage and push for you where it gets really soft, and then you just stop pulling. And it will pull through on its own and spin the crank a few times, basically. So you're storing energy in the spring, and you're letting it do its work. We're not doing this. Like, first of all, I'm not finding a spot. Like, you don't need to do that. You don't need to pull all the way through. You need to pull just enough where the flash starter has been tensioned, and it releases, and it gets soft, and stop. That's it.
Show us again.
Yeah. So I'll pull it through over the top dead center, and I'm feeling for the high spot where it grabs.
That's all it takes. That's all it takes.
Now, that's easy to do on a new engine that's freshly serviced from the factory.
With a fresh starter.
Fresh, yeah.
When you get all kinds of dirt in there,
Lubricated
those two pulleys
starter.
are seized.
Now,
Three wraps and 3 winds.
if you overprime, if you
got another
It
underprime,
shouldn't. It should.
Yeah.
It should start first, second pull every time.
Now notice again, I'm not touching the throttle. My throttle is hanging. Well, whether you should hang your throttle down is a different story, but I'm not. Right. I want to see if we can get it to do the thing I've been talking about, which is the So we think it's lean. So hopefully it will make the noise. I want you to hear this noise. That noise. That noise. That is the noise.
Mine's doing that.
That is a telltale sign that there's not enough fuel for it to go into the upper RPMs. Oh, now it's not going to run at all because we ran it rich, then we ran it lean, and there was fuel all over the engine, and now it's coupled it up, and now it's completely out of fuel. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, now that we know it's too lean, the procedure in the Scout video is like perfect way to tune it. We're going to go in steps. We're going to make it richer. So I'm going to take the low jet, which is the jet that is short, that does not have the sticker on it. I'm going to move it pretty much as little as I physically can. I can't stress this enough.
When you say as low as you can, you mean like 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
No.
1 minute at a time.
1 minute.
Half minute.
Just a little bit.
So
Most factory are super.
So what I do on a moster, to give you an idea how sensitive this is, I'll move it past where the spring rotates, and I'll back it off, almost to the same spot. So that moves at like less than a minute probably. So that's how small of increments we're talking about. So again, if you're rotating half a turn, quarter turn, an eighth of a turn, not gonna work. Simple as that. So I'm gonna move this maybe a minute. I moved it a little bit more than a minute. It's super lean right now. It doesn't even want to run. We have idle. We have fuel. Yeah, you can hear it. It's still doing the thing. Let's see going. Aha, okay. Okay. Do you hear the idle speeding up right now? Telltale sign that it's too lean. Now, if I can get it to run a little higher. No. You hear it settling quite high on the idle still? It's not really running high and then settling down, but it's a really, really high idle right now, you can tell. And I know there's not very much preload on the idle screw, or on the butterfly, so I know it shouldn't be running that high. But anyway, so let's do a little bit more fuel. Same thing you heard when I add throttle, it tries to go and die down.
Do you want me to adjust it on your back? You might just crack it open a little.
We can, yeah, we can do that.
Crack
Yeah,
it open a minute. Let's just do that and make it easier.
I try not to do that so that. Yeah, okay. Okay.
About a minute, right?
Yeah, we're doing another notch. What I want to hear is a stable idle. Oh, did you hear that? Yeah. Okay, watch this. Now it's showing stuff. High idle. Slowing down. Slowing down. Slowing down. Not by much, but it was hanging up and then it dropped down a little bit lower at idle. So when it's doing that,
the prop was spinning, and then it slowly went and stopped too.
yeah. So I abruptly let go of the throttle to let it go back to idle, but it doesn't go back to idle right away. Go ahead.
A minute.
Yeah. So we want to get to a point where we have a stable idle where it just sits there.
You guys hear a difference already?
Now, keep in mind, our idle is low, so it's still idling low. So it could still be kind of like behaving like it's lean or rich usually, because it is idling so low. That's okay for now. We got it where it idles. Now, here's how you find out whether you're in the ballpark. When I add throttle abruptly, if it resists, if it makes that sound, if it goes and tries to die, or if it just takes like a couple of revolutions for it to catch up, and like if you have to push through a wall basically, then it's still too lean. So we want to get to a place where it will transition into the higher RPMs when I add the throttle abruptly, right? And you want to be careful doing this because you're adding power, full power essentially to the engine, right? You hear that? Still lean. That time it did it.
It's getting closer, but still a little boost.
But you hear there's a couple of cycles that it skips, and then it will go to full power. You hear that? It is transitioning, but it's resisting. There's a wall you have to get through. So I think we're probably 1 or 2 off from being perfect, basically.
1 or 2 what?
1 or 2 minutes, 1 or 2 tiny steps.
By minutes, you mean like out of a 60-second clock? You mean like
1 degree. The smallest physical.
1 minute. Degree would be
Well, yeah.
whatever. But not like 60 minutes.
You know we're dating ourselves.
We're making it
Kids can't
richer.
read clocks.
As little as you can physically move it on each step. This is how I like to do it. Alright, ready? I'm gonna run it up first. Every time you make an adjustment, you do want to run the engine up a little bit and let it work its thing, because the carb is still at the old settings and there's fuel inside. You want to cycle the fuel through it before you do anything. So I'm going to add the throttle abruptly. Better. You see that? Now it's coming through. The first time it bogged down a little bit, and now it's coming through. But I can also tell when it's doing that, I can also tell that it's, even if it gets past that point where it's choking out, it's still spooling up a little bit slow. So we're going to do one more. What I want to see is I want to see this engine jump from idle when I add throttle abruptly straight into the higher RPMs. And then I want to see the idle where it's relatively stable after I adjust it a little bit, where it doesn't start slowing down. And that's the perfect spot. That's how we know it's a perfect spot. All right, ready? It's much better, but we're one more.
Tiny little adjustments, minutes on the clock at a time. Most are in fact are quite sensitive on this slow roll screw.
By the way, you guys are awesome for being here and listening. That was like a really long workshop, so thank you. There she is. Okay, ready? Let it go back to idle. He needs one more and then it's done. It's pretty, you could fly it like this. Actually, this would probably be better because you would file less plugs, but to give it a little bit of fuel is probably better for the engine. All right, we're gonna call it after this one, I think. And we're gonna need to let it idle. So right now, even though the idle is quite low, it's relatively stable. I'm just not going to touch it. All right, we have a good engine. So this is the point where you would adjust your idle to the speed that you want to keep it at.
So in theory, so let's say now you have a perfectly tuned engine, and will it maintain that idle indefinitely, like, or will a two-stroke naturally over-richen itself over time, or what? Like,
As seasons change, like in the Pacific Northwest where we're at, he's in Oregon, I'm in Washington. Winter comes, you'll have to adjust it. Spring comes, you'll have to adjust it. So altitude density will change depending on where you live with climate. Engines do with time lose compression. When they're new, they gain compression, so they do fluctuate over time from time to time. But generally, like if you have a well-tuned engine that's maintained,
but you could just turn that motor on, set it down, and you just walk away
Yeah.
from it. It would run in depth. Like,
when it's at this point, what I would do is I would turn the idle back from wherever you set it to, just a little bit, so it's a little bit low. Run it up, set it on the ground, see what it does. The telltale signs are really easy to spot when you do that. Again, if it's slowing down, if it starts shaking, smoke's coming out, even if it doesn't die, even if it just gets to that point and it's just shaking and low idle and smoking and struggling to keep running, you're too rich. If it's trying to run away from you, if you flew for a couple hours and you're coming in, your prop spinning, maybe a little too lean. If you're doing acro, it's dying, maybe a little too lean, it could be too rich.
Awesome.
What else?
All right, everybody go tune their motors.
Yes.
One safety call. So number one serious injury in paramotoring is ground starting, hands go through props. One of the things that Dimitri did this entire time is have the quick release prop on, the prop hub, and got all of the adjustments right until he needed to get like 1 or 2 minutes, and then he put his prop on. And so I've seen it way too many times. People like, they get this confirmation bias from starting their engine on the ground and not hurting themselves, that they think it's okay. I saw it even as of last week. So one of the big things when you're doing this, don't do this with the propeller on and start it from the ground. Any type of misadjustment or the throttle having any type of pressure can send the propeller right into you, and that's where the most amount of serious injuries from paramotoring comes from.
I'll tell you from direct experience, you're not big enough to hold back a motor 185. No matter how big you are in this group, I don't give a shit. Nobody here is big enough to hold it back because you're not going to expect it. And I can tell you also from direct experience that having an engine go to power even just past idle when you don't expect it is incredibly scary. So I used to ground start engines, I'll admit to it. One time I had an engine run away to maybe 50% power, and I could kill it pretty quickly. The whole frame went towards me and I was able to stop it, but that's not even half power. And no matter how well you check the cable, no matter how well you have everything set up on your engine, weird stuff happens all the time. Kyle Oakley had a bolt, a little screw on the butterfly valve, come off the butterfly valve, wedge itself under the butterfly valve. So when he checked the throttle, it had full motion. When you let it go, it snaps back. That's the check, right? You come up, if you want to start your engine to make sure everything's good, you're going to grab your throttle. You want to hear the butterfly. You want to hear it bottom out, right? So he did this, but there's a screw there. So it's like part way open. So when he fired up the engine, he went to part throttle. So no matter how well you check it, it will bite you in the end.